In our district, we have many derelict boarded up buildings and empty lots. And on some blocks, there's many as 5 or 6 of these sorts of properties. These lots are not cared for and invariably invite criminal activity, squatters, illegal dumping, drug activity, arsons, and unsafe growth. The city does not seem to be prepared to hold owners accountable, so they're allowed to hold on to these properties for decades without consequences. And what's your opinion?
Yeah. As a concerned Edmontonian, I want to engage with you to understand the needs of the neighborhood. And I firmly believe that everyone should be able to live free from harassment, free from worry, and be safe in the neighborhood. And the issue of these problem properties, derelict homes, and slum landlords who don't properly maintain these properties, I'm absolutely concerned about that. I will be working with you if I get elected to explore are there provisions under the Municipal Government Act that we can explore to tackle with them. And I will be working with the police to ensure there's proper enforcement and that city takes this seriously. I will work with you. Like I don't know all the solutions, but this is a problem that we can grapple together, and you got my commitment that we're going to work together to tackle these problem properties and deal with these slum.
So
It's I was raised by a farmer dad, so whenever I'm in an environment that has lots of gardening around it, I always feel really good. So this is an amazing garden. I've actually walked through and by here in the summer. And because of that, I have seen some of the examples of the derelict homes that you're talking about. And I can understand how uncomfortable it makes the neighbors feel, because I started walking through here in the winter and you don't really get a good sense of community and the pride that people take in their properties when everything's covered in snow. But when I came back through in the spring and summer, you see the amazing pride that people take in their properties and their gardens, and then right next door you have a derelict house, and you walk through the alleyways and you see some of the garbage, which, for the recent fires that have happened here in the community is also, potential for having some of these fires in the alleyways. There definitely needs to be a harder position here for Alberta Avenue. But equally, I have to tell you that I've been in some other communities and I've seen some of these boarded up homes that are concerns to residents. So I think it's a problem for the ward, something that that I would be paying very close attention and advocating that we need to make the owners accountable. I believe the right measures are in place. It's just that, have they really put the resources? Now, in 2020, June of 2020, a new program was put in place to deal with some of these properties. And so that program in itself is going to be coming to an end soon. And so there will be a need for the new council to sit back and assess. Has there been a reduction in some of the calls that have come in? Have there been improvements? And so what you really need is a city councilor that understands how serious it is for the residents. And I do.
Yeah, so great question, and something that hits pretty close to home too. We have a property exactly as you described, kind of across the alley from us, and it's gotten to the point where there's been a few explosions, like some pretty intense stuff that is, of course, a huge hazard to folks in the neighborhood. And I think that you're absolutely right. There needs to be some legitimate action and some legitimate consequences on the city side. I would like to have a conversation specifically with our legal branch about how far we can go. I think oftentimes homeowners are left, we'll call it kind of in a bind, because do you go with your bylaw side of things through the city? Is it EPS? Is it, actual criminal activity where we can call in sort of other organizations to deal with it. So it's kind of unclear for some folks as to which route to actually approach this from. So yes, legal department is one of them. I think in the long run, I would also like to have a conversation about even the zoning of some of these properties. If there's an opportunity to kind of do some earnest revitalization on the city side of things, not just leaving it up to the neighborhood, but being a little bit more proactive. So things like the zoning bylaw renewal that's happening right now, if there's an opportunity to talk about sort of embedding in the zoning an incentive to redevelop these properties, because sometimes people will just sit on them, right? It's more affordable for them to sit on the property than to redevelop it into something that's actually useful and is going to benefit the community. So that's something I really want to push on. Same thing can be said around district planning as well. So zoning bylaw kind of works with district planning. District planning is where the city is going to look at each district of the city and determine where do we want to see some more commercial activity? Where do we want to see maybe some higher density development, missing middle development? So if we're able to lay that groundwork, I think that we'll be in a fairly good place. And then on the, again, enforcement side of things, there needs to be a certain level of responsiveness that residents can expect. Because right now, even in conversations I've had with people on the doors, they'll say, hey, we've called so many times, like nobody's actually doing anything. Or the property will get shut down for maybe a week or two, but then people will be back in, kind of rip the boards off the building, and they're, potentially squatting there. So I think there needs to be a clear line of action for residents that they can see and that they can monitor.
Yes, it's been one of the focus areas of our campaign because, as you know, I live in this neighborhood and in Albert Avenue specifically, and quite a few surrounding neighborhoods faces similar issues. And I live beside the Norwood Square Park. I don't know, you're probably familiar with the park, and I live on the building right beside the park. So what happens is I hear at night things that are going on. I hear things that people a lot of times probably wouldn't see or hear. People are busy with life, but there's a lot of issues, for example, in the park with drug use and homelessness, and a lot of times you look at these problems, and these problem properties are one of the core causes that are bringing these issues to our communities. So I think we should definitely address it. I think it's a matter of priorities. I think if we shift from profiteering mindset into community-centered mindset when we approach our budget with the city and in the city, and we can definitely, we have the resources to deal with this. It's just I don't think there is enough money and efforts is being put behind it. I think because partly it's not a revenue generator, I believe that we need to, we have existing bylaws we need to enforce better. In terms of holding the property owners accountable, I'm not saying that enforcing it I'm not saying being tough on people who are down necessarily. I think they need help. But at the same time, I think we have to be tough on people who are causing our community this kind of pain. So yeah, I believe in a matter of prioritizing. We spend hundreds of millions in consulting fees. We spend billions on LRT. I think these are nice to have things. However, we have to cover a lot of basic things here and make sure we have a LRT currently that has, I know a lot of nuisance in it probably, and we're just trying to quadruple the size of that. So are we gonna have a nice LRT ultimately? I think we need to address those core issues before moving to nice to have things.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. So the next question is around good neighbor agreements. So our district is generally a YIMBY, yes, in our backyard type of community rather than a NIMBY community. As
Through the MGA and through the Big City Charter was trying to get different taxing powers and different other legislative powers from the province in order to be able to have some tools in the tool chest to deal with some of these properties. You know, we have community standards, and so buildings have to be kept up and, you know, lawns mowed and all those sorts of things. But besides that, it's pretty difficult to force developers to do something or landowners to do something. You know, my view is the best thing we can do is have the area around us succeed, and then eventually people will step up and do something with their property. You know, there's the carrot and the stick. There's very limited sticks we have as a city, and so we've got to figure out what the right carrots are. You know, we could look at doing some sort of incentivizing of some of these properties for some of the landowners. The challenge is, you know, it puts people then at a disadvantage who have already done something or planning on doing something, and they sort of get punished by not getting a carrot, so to speak. And so, you know, there are some things the city can do, but there's some things that the city's unfortunately hamstrung.
One more question on the same vein. Under your leadership, how will the city ensure that these properties be dealt with in a timely manner?
So at this time, I don't know what the solutions are, but I do understand your concerns, right? Are there solutions under Municipal Government Act that gives municipalities some authorities to either vacate these properties or ask the landlords to maintain them to certain standards, or can they be boarded up and demolished? That I don't know, right? I think we're going to explore those options. But also we need to work with cities, the community standards branch, right? There are tools in the community standards branch that are available to municipalities. I'm going to work with the police, and more importantly, I'm going to work with you to understand what we can do together.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I mean, we do have bylaws and we do have enforcement. I was on the city's community standards committee where we looked at problem properties and problem property owners, and so the city does have some enforcement tools there. They're very hesitant to use them, I'll say, which I don't think is great. When I was on that team, I kept pushing to get the city to be a bit more proactive and not give building owners, you know, not even second, third, fourth, fifth chances before they stepped in. So I do think from an enforcement standpoint, the city could step up and do something quicker.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Well, as an urban planner, I often think about kind of the hyper-local contexts of our neighborhood, and Board Métis is just so diverse. I always say that the needs and the challenges and the opportunities of a neighborhood like Alberta Ave or maybe a Highlands or an Abbotsfield, very different than Capilano, Gold Bar, Strathern, Bondy Dune. So being able to apply that hyper-local lens is something I'm really going to strive to do. So yes, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all blanket approach. I think it needs to be tailored because we experience very different things on this side of town. Yeah, absolutely.
This is a issue that has come up quite a number of times. I believe it's a very complex issue. There's no simple answers. That's the reality. I think a lot of times, you know, we have to hold the property owners accountable, because a lot of I believe I think that's the best thing we can do. Hold property owners accountable. And
But how? How would we do that?
Enforcing the bylaws. What are in the agreements? I think like we have to be a little bit more aggressive at enforcing certain bylaws. Fines, issuing fines, and making sure they're accountable to the things that they've agreed to. You know, like I don't see how else we could do it. I mean, you could say, yeah, like you can address the person who's causing the problem right there, arrest people or whatever, but I don't think that's necessary. I think if the environment is designed in a way that people understand that they can't behave in certain ways, I think that is certainly what we need to do. Like, you know, like there's a for example, there's a corridor and there's a lot of crime going on. If you make it a vibrant corridor and put like something loud in there, like a festival or something, it changes the whole dynamic. I think we need to have the same approach. I think environmental design is going to be ultimately huge on this one. Yeah.
In your experience, would you support a moratorium or a neighborhood overlay to deal with such issues such as this, which would support the community?
You know, I was on city council when we actually did put a moratorium on social housing for the some of the neighborhoods, right? I don't know if that helped though, right? I have to understand, but did it actually help to, and that moratorium was on social housing, and to spread social housing to other parts of the city. So we look at whether that was effective or not, right? So again, you know, these are very complicated issues, very, you know, there are no simple solutions to these problems. But I hear you. I hear your voices. I hear your concerns. You know, I would be frustrated as well if I was living in a neighborhood. I want to be a good neighbor. I'm doing everything that I can to revitalize neighborhood as you have been doing for decades. Your commitment to your community is phenomenal, and I deeply appreciate that commitment. And I would be equally frustrated as you are if I had derelict homes, you know, messy properties that are not kept to the standard, and landlords are not properly maintaining them and turning them to drug houses, right? I would be deeply concerned. So I hear you, and I am willing to work with you if I get elected, and I will make sure that we have council that work with you, and our city administration and the police service working with you, and we're going to explore all the options, and we're going to sit down. I'll make this commitment. If I get elected right after the election, within a few weeks, we'll sit down and we will you know, go deeply into these concerns and figure out how we can tackle these issues, because these properties do cause disorder means that people who are committed to the neighborhood don't feel safe in the neighborhood, and they start moving.
Yeah. Yep.
And when they start moving, then the community, the whole infrastructure, and the cohesiveness starts deteriorating, right? So I hear you, and we'll work together.
Well, I do believe that we have to make sure that different types of buildings and housing is spread out around the city. It doesn't do any good for any neighborhood to put, for example, you know, certain types of affordable housing in one area, and so I'd be in favor of doing that. You know, there are certain areas of the city that are actually asking for. Well, I'll use the example of affordable housing specifically. There's lots of other BIAs that are asking for more market housing, I'll say, and so the city's been hesitant to do that. I don't know why. So I think we've got to spread around. We do have to spread things around as much as possible in different areas of the city, and not to steal a line that I just heard, but I do really think that catching their breath is the right approach. And it's the same with infill housing. I know this is not exactly what you asked about, but you know, there's some communities that are really being hit by infill housing, and I believe in infill and doing that, but we've got to make sure that it's spread around the city as best as possible. But again, I keep going back to the point that we have limited authority sometimes as a city.
Yeah, and I have heard this quite a bit throughout the campaign, that sometimes these types of agreements will be put in place, but there's no follow through. You know, there's no real, I guess, consequence if it's not followed. And I think it has to start at the beginning in the development of these agreements too. If there's no collaboration with the community and it's just kind of placed on the community, it's pretty difficult to meet the needs of the neighborhood, right? So I think it has to start there. At the outset, there has to be buy-in and collaboration. On the follow-through side of things, I think that, I don't know, and I'll be honest, I don't know specific consequences that I'd like to see. I think that we need to work on it. I would be very happy to ask those questions of administration to determine what sort of tools we have within our repertoire if those agreements aren't being followed. So again, I think conversation with the legal department. I know it keeps coming back to that, but part of the role of being a good counselor is being able to ask the right questions, right? If you don't know the answers personally, getting smart folks who potentially do to bring those forward, and then not only have that be a council decision, but say, hey, community, what do you think of this? Do you think this would be an appropriate, I guess, actionable outcome if this isn't being followed? Yeah, so that's how I'd approach it. But also very open to having conversations if anyone around the table has suggestions on that front. Yeah.
There's been a lot of talks about sharing the burden, like the whole city basically trying to band together and distribute services to every community, you know, and even use community centers as community leagues as catalyst for, you know, distributing this kind of services. I think that's we need to move in that direction for sure. And I know like number of, you know, more affluent communities, or they might be like they might have not in my backyard kind of attitude, which is happening. But what happens is that the problem has centralized so much just around this one area that it's I think it's causing a lot of problems for, you know, for this one area, and I think that's not fair either. You know, when they said a couple of debates ago, they asked me about putting safe injection site in here. Like, I understand it saves lives and like it's good, you know, like overdoses, it brings down the number of overdoses and a lot of positives, but how many more things we are going to put in this community that will bring more and more people to acquire these services, right? So I believe in the council, I would be loud and clear about that, and I would definitely push to say, hey, yeah, let's do it. You know, let's have all the things that are necessary to meet the needs of everyone, but let's do it in a manner where like every part of the city contributes the same. That's what I would say. It's not that I'm saying not in my backyard, but I'm saying in everyone's backyard.
Yeah,
let's all share the burden. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Sohi. Our district is generally YIMBY, yes in our backyard community, rather than a NIMBY community, not in our backyard. As such, we've had various organizations in our district providing various types of housing and social services. These organizations are required to send out good neighbor agreements that outline what they are and what the city will do to help the surrounding community and support them. These agreements are developed sometimes with and sometimes without the community and are often sent out months after the fact. Furthermore, there is often a lack of contact information, phone numbers, contact names, etc. to share a complaint. What solutions can you suggest when these good neighbor agreements are not abided by, which has repeatedly been our experience?
No, I'm a big fan of Alberta Avenue. This is, I would say, if you really want to look at a model of inclusion and revitalization of a neighborhood, Alberta Avenue is that model. You have embraced people from multicultural communities to this avenue. You walk 118 Avenue, what you see is rich multicultural, and you have embraced indigenous peoples into this land, into this avenue, because this is their place. This is the land that we building our lives on, and this is indigenous land. So that inclusion of indigenous communities, multicultural communities into arts, into culture, you are doing everything that is needed to build that cohesive community, right? And if there are agreements that need to be signed, that everyone will behave in a good way, and they're good neighbor agreements, if they're not being lived up to, then we need to make sure that they're being lived up to.
Well, again, I'm pretty practical with these things, and you know, we do have a stick and a carrot scenario. You know, I like to think people are well-meaning, and landowners and building owners are well-meaning, and they're gonna do what they do on their property and then do what's the benefit for the community. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time, and I know the odd situation that has happened, and I know of a couple instances on the avenue here specifically that's happened, specifically the tire pile over there down the way, and so you know, honestly, I don't know the answer because of what rules the city has and what the rules is, and what the city just can't practically do. So it's in an ideal world you get buy-in before someone buy a piece of property or before they build something or not build something. But when they don't, I don't know if I have an answer.
So I would be open to having that conversation about, I guess, redefining that. I think historically we have seen a real concentration of supports, of social services, of shelters and affordable housing within our downtown core, almost in a segregated manner. I think that you mentioned this is a YIMBY neighborhood. We recognize that people are out there. There's vulnerable and marginalized folks who are hurting, right? And at the same time, we can't just keep concentrating it in one particular area of our city because it's not necessarily good for the neighborhoods and the neighbors who live there, but it's also not really conducive to recovery, right? We want to be able to invest in things like permanent supportive housing, where there's mental health supports, addiction supports, employment supports, kind of wrapping around the housing itself, but the location matters too. I really believe in a more distributed model, and obviously not sticking it way out in the boonies, but making sure it's well connected to transit, well connected to good amenities and grocery stores, but being able to integrate it into other neighborhoods, I think is the direction we have to go. And we're generally starting to move in that direction. I am happy to see 2 new permanent supportive housing projects in our ward, both south of the river. One is over near Capilano Mall, kind of near the skate park, and the other's over near King Edward Park. So that's good, I think. Of course, there's always some fear, we'll call it, when you're introducing things like permanent supportive housing into neighborhoods and helping folks and neighbors recognize that this is actually it's going to be a good thing for the city as a whole, right? That's the work that I'm quite excited to do.
I think there's a number of different issues that kind of, when you have these agreements, even to when development happens as well, we get these kind of agreements. We had an agreement with one of the developers that was adjacent to our community in Hollywood and stuff like that. So you get those kind of agreements as well with developers, and so what I see as the difficulty is that they really don't have the force of law. They're almost like they're not contractual as they are, a willingness for both parties to meet and try and abide by certain ground rules that are mutually established, right? But the problem is that when one party of that does not want to kind of cooperate, then it's kind of a broken relationship, and you don't really get those kinds of events or things like that are happening. And so I think for that, again, the city has a role to play, right, in building that community. I think community is one of these building blocks for our city, and really good, healthy communities in all different respects do really good things in our neighborhoods and stuff like that. And so, that starts at the community level, but it can also apply to other agencies and stuff like that work within the community and stuff like that. Oh, thank you very much. So, in that regard, I think that, and I'm not a lawyer, so whether or not these things can be brought to the force of law, and how much you can get that kind of contractual kind of obligation. But I think that the city certainly has a role to play in nurturing these agreements and also making sure that they're abided by, whether that may sometimes, if there's kind of any kind of friction and stuff like that, to bring in some mediation and so on, right? But I think that letting those things just fester in the community leads to division and so on and so forth, and so they're not conducive to try and making sure that we're doing what we want to do to make sure that various social agencies are operating to their full potential within in the community and so on. So
yeah, we definitely find that there, our voices are not heard as a community.
Yeah. Well, and I think the city as well, like the idea of the liaisons with the city to make sure that there's that open communication. Like we have NRCs and things like that, but those kinds of things that where you got that. It's not just the city dispensing information, but actually working and coordinating with with various groups and stuff like that in partnership, because with those goals in mind that we're trying to build community, and it's not just the city that's responsible for doing that by any means, right? But they can facilitate as much as possible as well if they're working in that kind of collective partnership as opposed to try an us versus them.
Well, I think it definitely more. Better inspection and making sure that we find and I know that from being a chef and running restaurants, right? And it happens in the middle of busiest service, like everyone comes at the same time and things fall apart, right? As a leader, my job is always in that scenario to go find what was the reason the whole thing fell apart, what was the reason these problems are occurring, and then address them. And I think in this regard as well, like we have to, sorry, I think can you repeat Dimples and see like what are the areas that we're lacking and put have more more control over that and more inspection getting done in those areas. For the infill in terms of like our neighborhood character and the mature neighborhoods, I think that has been also one of the big concerns throughout the campaign that people brought up to me a lot. I believe that we need, in certain neighborhoods, mature neighborhoods, we need a bylaw like right to light, where like if someone comes and puts a big building right beside you, they need to respect you. You've been there, like let's say you make this nice garden and they put a building and cast shadow over this, and this kinds of stuff I think we need to think about. I think we have beautiful mature neighborhoods. Most environmentally friendly thing to do is to fix the buildings we have and live in them instead of tearing them down and building new ones, especially if they have character to them, I own a historic property and I designated it so no one can tear it down, and so I am quite passionate about this issue. I think I would be a big advocate for that. I think we need more density, for sure, and I believe we need to do it around the arterial roads, like around like high traffic areas, like 75 streets, it's just naturally calling for it. Just put big buildings around there all across those like areas. And I come from a city, I was born in Tehran, and it's a city of 15 million people. So it's pretty dense. So I know what densification looks like. So I think, not to say Tehran has the best infrastructure or anything. I mean, like it's a very, very like organically grown, not it's just it's a little bit of a mess. But in general, I know that we can achieve both. We can have our quiet cul-de-sacs, and you come out of that quiet area, and then there's like big buildings. So.
Yeah.
What is the consequence for the failure to adhere to the good nature good neighbor agreement? Would you implement something to ensure that good neighbor agreements are followed? In your opinion, who should monitor these agreements and when they aren't being?
No, I will sit down with you to understand what mechanism there has to be to ensure that those agreements are followed. I don't know the mechanics of them. I don't know the details of those agreements, right? So without knowing that, I can't really give you a specific answer to those. But we as neighbors, we have social contract with each other, right? Yeah. That's on the written social contract we expect to live by every day, right? And that's what neighborhood is about. That's what neighborhood whatever written agreement or unwritten agreements about. We are supposed to be there for each other. We are supposed to behave in certain ways that we support each other.
Well, I think it has to be a partnership between the city and the BIA and the different organizations in the area. Everyone's got a part to play here. One of the challenges of the city is we download a lot of things onto the BIAs, so 118th Street and Stony Plain Road and all the other ones, and we don't give them really enough resources. And I mean resources from money, but also resources from expertise or even partnerships with some of the city infrastructure, operational infrastructure that the city has that can step in to help. And sometimes I do know that we leave the associations on their own to deal with some of these challenges, and they don't have the time or the resources or the money to do so. So the way I would look at that is to try to get the city and the organizations locally to work together in you know, I don't want to say collaborative and all those buzzwords, but really they got to work together and kind of address these problems head on, because it makes a huge difference to this community or any others.
Absolutely. I think if the plans are approved and committed, unless they reapply and go through the process again and reevaluate it, I don't think they should be able to change anything. I think they should follow it to the T, like everything. But you know, then I hear a lot that is not the case, which is quite surprising. I think, you know, I think cities should do a better job enforcing those. And I also hear a lot from people like, you know, because the developers want to cheap out in certain cases and not put the right enforcement in when they're you know, demolishing and you know, repouring the foundation and whatever, pouring a new foundation, like people's neighboring like basements get damaged or like foundation get damaged on their buildings, and these are very costly to fix, and it's something you can't like directly, a lot of times you can't directly prove it to, so it's like it's a hard situation for a lot of people. So I think definitely we need to do a better job of making sure like they enforce their foundations properly and put the right protection in for neighboring properties when they do development. I think we also need to make sure they stick to the plan, and if they want to change their plans, they have to reapply and go through the process again.
Our neighbourhoods have a disproportionately high level of non-market housing compared to the majority of neighbourhoods in Edmonton. So currently, when the city accesses this type of housing to meet its goal of 16% affordable housing in each neighbourhood, it only accounts for the housing that receives municipal funds and does not take into account those that are funded by other means. That are privately owned. This puts our community at a much greater percentage than 16%. So first, would you change the way affordable housing is accounted for in neighborhoods to accurately reflect the density of such housing in the core districts? And secondly, what tactics or methods would you implement to help the community deal with high levels of non-market and
No, I'm a firm believer that the way we need to build social and affordable housing, that it has to be integral to the community. You should not be able to distinguish social housing from market housing, right? I lived in Millwoods for 40 years. That's where my home is. And Millwoods is a good model where you have single family homes, you have apartment buildings, you have social housing in the same neighborhood, and you have you know, other types of market housing. And I have never been afraid to speak up whenever we need to make sure that our housing policies are inclusionary. I've been a big supporter of first-time home buyers program. Right? There was a lot of opposition in the communities to it. I worked with communities to deal with those opposition, but at the end of the day, I was very firm that we all need to make sure that we have housing where people want to live, have the choice to live in, right? So without going into specifics, I think social housing, affordable housing should be available throughout the city, and there should not be high concentration in certain neighborhoods, because that really impacts the neighborhood.
And you know, that's where I see the problem is if you are saying you're going to build one thing and then through the middle of that process changing what you're building, that's not allowed. That's not what you got your permit for. So again, it does come back to that enforcement piece, and like I just mentioned, being able to have checkpoints throughout the entire process, like that should have been caught way earlier on in my mind, so it didn't get to the point where it's actually literally being constructed. So that's what I would say is just having a dedicated team on the compliance side of things who is ensuring that builders are following the rules and being respectful of their neighbor.
Yeah, I got a pretty strong opinion about this. You know, we have a lot of, as I mentioned in my last answer, we have a lot of flexibility on our infill right now. So virtually any lot can be infilled in some capacity and expanded on and get more density. So we don't need to make it even easier because there's just lots to do all around the city. So therefore, when someone does go ahead and do something like that and break the rules, now what the challenge is the city's hesitant to to do anything dramatic, you know. So, and my view is, if someone does something like that, literally make them tear the building down. I have no problem saying that, no problem. And the city's always like, well, you know, they didn't follow the rules, but, you know, and they always give them a benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, the rules are in place. They're pretty flexible. You can do virtually what you want within those rules. And so when someone breaks those rules, especially in a significant way, I have literally no problem making them tear the building down at their expense. Literally none. I can't say that's strong enough.
Community to deal with high level of non-market and emergency housing.
So I've got a full plan on my website about affordable housing and how we're going to fund it and operate it. I do believe that we have too high of a concentration in certain neighborhoods, including this one, or parts of this one for sure. So we do have to spread it around. We also do have to partner more with the private sector to get some of these units built. And in that case, we could be using existing buildings and new builds in a variety of different parts of the city. And I'll say again, like I said earlier, the BIAs are asking for this, and so there are certain pockets of the city that we should be doing this, not only in this area. And I know this area's got challenges and a lot of other, you know, Chinatown and other areas where there's been a glut of services and housing that is below market, and so we do have to spread it around in various neighborhoods of the city.
Yeah, and I would go back to the whole issue of enforcement, but also, you know, like, I think that what happens and this is, we've seen this historically, and it just creates the problem, and that it exacerbates over time, because the city is its own worst enemy by not holding developers to account to do certain things, and then it's almost like they beg forgiveness after the fact, right? And that, oh, we went over the height by a meter, but we're not going to make it actually bring that down. It's like, I'm sorry, we had a rule that said you had a certain height that you were allowed to go to, and you've exceeded that. It's your expense. Take it back down, right? If you've got your approval for a fourplex, essentially, if it was a duplex with two basement suites and stuff like that, and you are now doing it, then shut it down, right? And you have to go back to what you were, because it's otherwise, again, goes back to that idea of this free-for-all, where you don't have rules and the city doesn't know what's actually happening in these do you actually have if you've got cooking and other types of things that are happening in rooms that don't have proper ventilation and so on. There's all kinds of things. This is why we have zoning. This is why we're not in the 18th century anymore in terms of those codes and stuff like that, because they are about safety and they're about us planning the city in a certain way. And you shouldn't let the developers skirt these rules to just make a profit at those. And if you legitimately think that you can build a boarding house of some substance, then go ahead and do it. But first you have to then get the approval to do that and meet the codes that are then in place for that. If you don't follow the codes, you don't get to build. And if you build and then don't follow the code after the fact, we will come in and shut you down. And again, the city, it seems to be so reticent that we're going to be anti-business and we'll get this kind of, but what we've done on the opposite side is we're anti-community. Because what we're doing is we're giving the developers a free-for-all to do whatever they want to do, and it leaves the community. And I've been on community boards for 20 years where we deal with these issues, and you exhaust the resources of neighbors that are upset about the upzoning that doesn't, or they reapply. Like, I believe we need to have sunset clauses in developments. When you don't develop after a certain period of time, you go back to what the original zoning was. So you don't get to just start again. You have to start again rather than just hold the community hostage and stuff like that. Or you don't get to apply multiple times, so that you don't get the answer. I want a cookie, and you keep hounding until you get the cookie. No, you're going to get one crack at it. You better work with the community, make those kinds of good relationship building and stuff like that, have a good neighbor agreement and so on. And if you then get to council, it will be one that will be that symbiotic kind of relationship that has developed as a result. And that ultimately will get better development and so on. But if we just let them the developers then repeat the process until they get to what they want, the community eventually gets worn down, and this is what happens over and over again. I've seen it, like the Strathern Heights one that I was just mentioned earlier. This is the 4th time they've been at council in 13 years, and they haven't built anything. 13 years, and they haven't put a shovel in the ground yet. So at what point is the community, and this last time, it was no surprise, only a dozen of us showed up to speak, because people were just like, oh, they're never going to build, or when they do build, it's like, you might as well do it, right? And so you wear people down, they're playing the long game, and kids, they promised a community park in that neighborhood in 2008. We built our own anyway. If we waited for them, it still wouldn't be there. My kids are now in university, right? So, right? So, like, they're a little bit big for jungle gyms anymore, right? So, so that's the kind of thing where if we're not holding these developers to account, and we're not putting in rules that we also enforce, we then shoot ourselves in the foot, and the consequences are grave, because it's the community that suffers, and we are the ones that have to deal with the shrapnel of that throughout our neighborhoods and stuff like that. And we have endless meetings of chasing our tail around because we don't have a dance partner in the city that really is thinking about it and how it's actually the impacts. And we're then we're trying to do we're trying to fix the problems after the fact rather than dealing with the root problems, right?
Building code standards for infill development. Residents in the neighborhood have seen infills being built over the past couple of years. Many people are concerned with the construction standards, to the point where some have called for city inspectors to come by and assess the build. Recently, there was a fire in the front back duplex, and the wall literally fell off. This is just across the street from us, but I didn't do this question. In fact, the bang of the wall falling onto the house next door is what woke us up at 4 in the morning. It fell out of the half-built building, not due to any explosion, but because the wall wasn't correctly installed. How would you improve existing building codes when developers want to build in our neighborhoods? And what assurance will you provide the community that this sort of example will not happen again?
Again, building standards, building codes must be followed. I don't know why they were not followed in this case. That's why we have inspectors. Their role is to make sure buildings are being built to the specs and the standards. And as we encourage more infill, we need to make sure that those standards and there's buy-in from people. If it's not being built to standard, then we actually lose the purpose, and we lose the support from the neighborhood.
It's come to our attention that in the district, an infill developer required a permit to build a front-back duplex. The duplex was originally supposed to have 2 above-ground suites and 2 basement suites. During the building process, however, they changed the building design to that of a boarding house with numerous bedrooms, each containing an ensuite bathroom. There's 1 kitchen, the upper-level bedrooms accessed from both sides of the building, and another kitchen in the basement for the lower-level bedroom suite on combinations. Do you think that these types of rooming houses should be allowed in urban core communities where historically they've ended up becoming problem properties? And what would you implement to ensure that the builders do not change their plan? Is there currently no watchdogs to stop this from happening? Do you think that the neighbors should be consulted when a new build or a pre-existing building will become a rooming house?
The fires and the arson that have been happening in this community is just unacceptable. I heard about the wall that literally fell onto somebody's house, onto their property, and that's just horrendous. So when it comes to infill, I think the vast majority of Edmontonians understand, obviously we can't spread outwards endlessly, and we have to gently densify our neighborhoods, but we have to do it in a way that's actually going to benefit the community, and in the process make sure that nobody's property is getting damaged. And I think I've done a lot of work in the infill space, more on the policy side, but there's huge strides to be made on the enforcement side of things, on the safety code side of things as well, making sure that our infill compliance team actually has enough staff to get around to all of these projects. I think that's going to be imperative going forward, because if we keep having these kind of bad infill stories and sometimes horror stories, it doesn't give infill a good name, right? And we're trying to encourage it, but if we keep having these types of experiences in our communities, it makes it very hard to push that conversation further. So for me, it just goes hand in hand with building more sustainable, walkable, livable communities. You have to have a good process in place when something does go wrong. If you're not able to deal with it at the outset, which is my approach, I would like to see some better staffing on the front end so that projects are followed through in kind of a sequential manner so that every checkpoint things are kept up to code. Yeah.
Well, I think the building codes we have seem to me to be enough. It's more about the enforcement. And when we first started the infill, I'll say promoting, when I was first on city council, I don't remember the year this really became a thing. I'm going to say 2014 or something like that. And we really rezoned, for the most part, the city to allow infill building and lot splitting and eventually garden suites and everything else. There was a problem with enforcement of the rules, not so much the zoning and the rules themselves. And so there were a lot of new infill builders to be frank, didn't know what they were doing. And so we had a combination of people didn't know what they're doing and then a lack of city enforcement, which created a lot of problems. Now, the city's gotten a lot better, so not everything's negative. I think they're doing a decent job. There are still occasions where an infill builder, who are typically smaller and less experienced, I'll say break the rules or don't follow the rules and then causes problems for their neighbors. And so the city has to do a better job of enforcement. But I do think that's a lot better than it was a few years ago. And I know there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, I think it's going a lot better. And the city's got a lot of, as an aside, the city's got a lot of flexibility when it comes to infill now, so we don't need more. There's lots of opportunity to infill the city in a variety of different ways in virtually every lot in the city. And so I'm not a fan of expanding that anymore because that'll come. But one of the challenges is there's just a lot of people doing it, and a lot of people unfortunately aren't experienced and sometimes don't know what they're doing. And the cities, again, has more resources now than they did a few years ago for enforcement. So I think the problems are fewer than they were before.
Well, and this is one thing where I've actually talked to lots of people as well about, in the sense that in terms of inspections and stuff like that, the city actually makes a lot of money off of development permits, like a lot of money. And it's in the multi-millions of dollars. And yet, the ability to get permits is problematic, but the inspections and the follow through and stuff like that, I can tell you, my wife and I built a house infill ourselves in 2015, and I was appalled that the level of inspection as we went along that road, and like literally we had someone that came to do our final grade inspection, for example, that didn't even get out of their car, right? And gave a final grade inspection, and they check the box, right? So we need to make sure that we are doing due diligence, and there's been some auditing of that department within planning for permitting and stuff like that. But I think there's two issues. One of them is about the bottleneck, about how that permitting actually, what permits do get done, so that you can actually make sure that we can get more creative types of housing and stuff like that for people that don't follow just, we built a mother-in-law suite in our place, for example. And to be able to try and get that done took a lot of work. And it shouldn't be that hard if you want to put in an extra unit in your house to make sure that you can create, again, going back to the question earlier about affordability, I support garage suites and garden suites and pork chop lots and that are going to make those kinds of amazing types of affordability that are within neighborhoods and stuff like that. So it's not all developer driven. It can be also, from the ground up kind of thing, right? So, but to me, it's almost like an obligation or a contract the city has. Once you issue the permits, you also have to follow through to make sure that those people are doing what they're doing. Yeah. And the city knows that there's developers that are good developers and that have track records of 20 and 30 plus years that do the right thing. But then there are other ones that don't have that same track record, and so you can pretty well guess which ones need to have more inspections and which ones don't based on that. So why is it that we're not doing that and making sure that due diligence is happening? And as soon as, I don't know if it would be like a system of A to D or something like that, but if you're an A type developer that's got like a Better Business Bureau kind of seal, then inspections still have to happen there, obviously, but it may not be as rigorous. But if you're on the D, you're an entry-level developer and we don't know anything about you, and or you've been had problems in other developments that you've done, we're going to expect you every single step of the way to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do. It's for safety for one, and not cutting corners and stuff like that, so that building doesn't later on become a fire hazard, or it has flooding and leaves all kinds of people on the hook for money and stuff like that. Because quite frankly, I think the building codes in this province are very substandard in many respects as well. And then we're not even enforcing them to the degree that we need to and stuff like that. And when you're talking about units where there's multiple units that are built and stuff like that, and they're done by fly-by-night developers, they're building to the most shoddy standard that they can just to slap something up and get people in rooms and stuff like that. And that jeopardizes those people's safety. And then over the long term, if those buildings are not built well, do they also then become derelict 10, 15 years down the road? And then you're having this conversation about enforcement that we went back to the first question, right?
Yeah.
So.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just to add to that, and I guess, I think it sounds like a great solution that you should be able to document and record all of these, sort of developers and their track record and so on. But a lot of these folks don't go by the same name. They'll change the company. They'll go by a numbered company, and so like it would be sometimes difficult to say, well, this could be a problem developer, but we don't know because all of a sudden they're not going by a certain name anymore. They're going by.
Well, and that's why I would say that they would start off, if we had it as a grading system as an example, and I'd have to talk to planners to see how feasible this is, but you start off at the lowest level until you prove yourself to be competent. So you don't get to, if you're not building gold standard housing that we already know that you have as a track record, and I'm not going to mention any particular developers just for the sake of that, but we know that there's good friends with the home builder that we went with and stuff like that. There's really good home builders in the city that are doing amazing work and stuff like that. But if you haven't proven yourself to be that, and then exactly that, and there's been condos and other things like that where they change their number company and stuff like that. But as soon as we don't know your record because you're a new company, and this might even stop those types of developers from doing that. If you knew you had a more rigorous inspection criteria because you don't have a track record, maybe that's going to want you not to flip your name in your company before you go approach the city for your development permits and so on. Whereas if you've got the track record, it will reward those people that do good builds because they're not going to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb and stuff like that as much, right, as a possibility, right? So.
Yeah.
And what do you need if elected into office from the Edmonton core neighborhoods to get serious about tackling some of these issues?
I
What's
think
missing and what are you doing?
I think what I understand talking to you and then my time on city council, I believe that strong neighborhoods should have kind of mixture of housing of every type and in every neighborhood. Right? Not just certain neighborhoods. And we need to work with communities to ensure that they're properly supported. So what I will do, as I said earlier, if I get elected, I'll sit down with you. I'll dig deeper into these problems and try to come up with solutions. Right? I don't know what the solutions are. I'll be very honest with you and transparent with you. But my commitment is to listen and to work with you and tap into the community knowledge and experience and what you're going through, and then try to figure out the solution. That's my commitment. We will get to this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Absolutely.
your participating in this forum.
Cool. So we'll send it over. That we'll probably take some clips out of it,
Yes.
right?
Thank you. What would you need if elected into office from the Edmonton core neighborhoods to get serious about tackling some of these issues?
Well,
How can we support the
yeah,
process?
the way, I'll give you a hokey political answer if you like, which is, collaboration. We're going to talk about all these problems and we'll work together and solve them and rah, rah, rah. But at the end of the day, we have to do something practical about these situations, and I don't have all the answers. I don't know. And so the best thing we can do is listen to the neighborhood as best as possible, give them the sort of consultation, as it were, but very clearly about what they can and what they cannot affect. So, one of the challenges with our city consultation process is sometimes people don't go into it not knowing what they can affect and what is sort of decided already based on a bunch of other parameters that maybe they don't know about. And so when we're talking with issues like the ones we've been talking about for 118th Avenue, having the community come and talk to the city about all these problems is great. Making sure the community knows what can and cannot be changed is really good. And then listening to the community and doing what's best for them. And we have to look at every community differently. One of the challenges I think is in the city right now is we have a lot of blanket rules for every community, and lots of communities are the same, but there really are some communities that are just fundamentally different.
That's right.
And this is one of them, and we have to make sure that we listen to the people that live here and work here and have some flexibility, because again, communities are different and maybe it doesn't always fit for everybody, and maybe some communities you have to do things a little bit different. And it's okay to treat communities a little bit different based on their unique circumstance.